Chapter 8 of the Romance of Modern Engineering. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Betty B. The Romance of Modern Engineering by Archibald Williams. Cairo to the Cape. What's in a name? Little, perhaps, but unite a couple of names into a catchword that neatly expresses the political wishes of a large body of people or a nation, and their influence may be great. Petersburg to Pekin has been heard in Russian circles for years, and lo, the Trans-Siberian Railway. Berlin to Baghdad, cried the German, and we learn of schemes for a railway from the Prussian capital to the Persian Gulf. We shall see what will happen. Of late years, Englishmen, too, have not lacked their alliterative phrase. The Cape to Cairo, or Cairo to the Cape. Either way it tickles the ear and is very suggestive. One sees in one's mind's eye the locomotive puffing through the terra incognita on which some little light has been thrown by Livingstone, Stanley, Grant, Speke, Grogan, and other intrepid explorers, puffing steadily ahead through forest and swamp, mountain and lofty plateau, beside great lakes and over mighty rivers, till it emerges on the sands of Egypt, or the more hospitable plains of Rhodesia. Who first conceived a trans-African railway it is at this time hard to say, but we know who first brought the idea into prominence and took decisive steps toward its realization. That man was the great empire builder, Cecil Rhodes. Essentially a man of vast schemes, he treasured the conception of a metal highway from one end of Africa to the other, on English soil throughout almost its entire length. The railway to Khartoum grew from military necessity. The Cape lines developed to keep pace with the needs of colonization. Cecil Rhodes added Rhodesia to the British possessions and strained every nerve to traverse the new country with a line that should form an important link in the great chain, and, after vainly seeking aid from the English government, started a company to carry through his ideas. Furthermore, he approached the German emperor and obtained concessions, for a price, to carry his line through German territory to join the system of British Central Africa. His untimely death has stilled the guiding hand, but the work is carried on, and doubtless in due time the word "fini" will be written to this important chapter in continental engineering, and we shall be able to book direct from Cairo to the Cape for the grand tour of Central Africa. The work is stupendous, and the difficulties are great, especially the political. Through unlucky want of foresight, the red portion of the map of Africa is severed by German and Belgian territory for a distance of some 350 miles. But for that break all would be plain sailing, hence, if need bids, the engineer will not be denied, as this volume endeavors to show. Owing to this foreign element in the path of the Cape to Cairo, it cannot serve strategical ends. Starting as it does from the east end of the Mediterranean, it will never be able to compete against the direct sea route from England to the Cape in point of speed. Its object is commercial. Like a gigantic backbone, it will carry the nerves of commercial life along the continent, promote local traffic, and by means of branches to the oceans on east and west, furnish outlets for the great future trade of Africa's wealthiest regions, the Central. Until a railway comes, it is impossible to judge the capabilities of those tropical countries round the Great Lakes. But let the iron way pass through, and then what wealth of cattle, grain, rubber, cotton, sugar, spices, and minerals of all sorts may reward the capitalist who has risked his money. Africa is a country to be conquered by the railway. Already the Uganda line, of which more presently, has dealt deadly blows to the slave traffic, and given us such a grip on the country as nothing else, not even the constant incursions of disciplined troops, could give. The same story will soon be told of the Cape to Cairo line. The first stage of the scheme was completed long before Mr. Rhodes had touched it with the magic of his name. In 1859, Mr. Rhodes was then 6 years old. A line was begun between Cape Town and Wellington, 58 miles away. The discovery of diamonds in Griqualand West, 1867, caused a sudden extension to Worcester, through very difficult country, where heavy gradients and sharp curves are the rule. The terminal station quickly changed its name, Matchies Fontaine, Kimberley, Vryburg, as the rail passed over the rolling Karroo. In 1885, the first train steamed into Kimberley. In 1890, Vryburg stabled the iron steed. Mr. Rhodes now came in. In 1893, the Rhodesia Railways Company was formed for driving a line through Mafeking to the Zambesi. The British South Africa Company advanced the money, and Messrs. Pauling and Company undertook the contract, with Sir Charles Metcalfe and Sir Douglas Fox as engineers. The going is easy through Bechuanaland, and consequently railhead advanced very fast. By June, 1895, Gaborone was reached. On November 4, 1897, a decorated locomotive slid into Bulawayo, 1,360 miles from Cape Town. The engineers have not halted there. To the northeast the line stretches a farther 250 miles to Salisbury, where it joins the track running southeast to Beira on the Portuguese coast. Another track runs northwest from Bulawayo to the wonky coalfields en route to the magnificent Victoria Falls. As Cecil Rhodes wished it, the spray of the falls will soon pass over the carriages. From the Zambesi the rail is destined to pass through northeastern Rhodesia, rich in minerals and rubber, to the southern end of Lake Tanganyika. From this point the route is a matter of discussion. Some people urge making use of the string of Great Lakes, Tanganyika, Kivu, Albert Edward Nyanza, the Albert Nyanza, joining them by short lines, and so attaining the Nile, which would float the traveler and his merchandise down to Khartoum, where he may take his choice of river or rail. Major General Sir Rudolph von Slatin, an authority worth quoting, is entirely in favor of utilizing the Nile waterway between Khartoum and Uganda. With reference to the Cape to Cairo railway, he says, "In my opinion it will be quite useless, and only a waste of money, to continue the railway south from Khartoum. From Khartoum to Uganda is practically impossible for a railway without the expenditure of immense capital, and in any case, during the rains, there would be so many interruptions that a line would be practically useless. As you have a waterway in this direction, and a river navigable the whole year, it would seem a waste of time and money to build a railway which could never be relied on. As the line will serve commercial purposes, it is therefore probable that for many years it will terminate at or near the Albert Nyanza. About the middle section, i.e., from the south end of Tanganyika to Albert Nyanza, Mr. E. S. Grogan, the first white man to traverse Africa from south to north, has made the following suggestions: to utilize Tanganyika from Kituta to Usambara near the north end. From that point a light railway could be laid along the flat valley of the river Rusisi to the south end of Lake Kivu, then steamer again for 60 miles to the northeast corner of the lake, whence another short line would pass through the mountains and drop gradually to Lake Albert Edward, which it would skirt on the right bank until the main stream of the Nile is reached. Except in the neighborhood of Mount Ruwenzori, the country does not afford any great physical obstacles to the engineers, whose deadliest foe probably would be the fevers that breed so freely in the swamps of Central Africa. The first feeders of the main line will, on account of geographical conditions, run in from the east coast. Already we have the Durban Pretoria and Delagoa Bay Pretoria railways stretching toward the backbone. Farther north is the Beira Salisbury connection. North of that again is projected a German line from Dar es Salaam to Ujiji on Tanganyika, with a branch to the Victoria Nyanza, to which English engineers have driven the now famous Uganda Railway. A short track from Berber to Suakin would place the Cape to Cairo in communication with the Red Sea. The Uganda Railway, running from the island of Mombasa to Port Florence on the Victoria Nyanza is 580 miles long. That is, it covers a distance 50 miles greater than the journey from London to Aberdeen. Surveys for the line were begun in 1891 and completed by 1895. The following year operations commenced at Mombasa, which was connected with the mainland by a temporary bridge, while the fine Salisbury Bridge was in course of construction. The road passes through hilly country that rises steadily for the first 360 miles, with occasional dips to an elevation of 7,800 feet. It then sinks nearly 2,000 feet into the Great Rift Valley, preparatory to a precipitous climb to Mau, 8,300 feet above sea level. Then follows a continuous drop of 4,500 feet to the lake. The engineers were much troubled with labor questions. The country is sparsely inhabited, and the natives are among the laziest folk on the earth. Mr. Grogan says in this connection, "The natives of the country, alas, were skin and bone. A 2 years' drought had driven them through starvation to death by the thousand. I saw grown men and women scrambling for grains of rice that had accumulated on the filthy ground sheets or bare floor of the Indians' tents, and women carrying huge planks by a strap round the forehead in order to earn a handful of food from the 2 hulking coolies whose work it was. All because you can't get a day's work out of an African buck nigger, even though he be starving." As a result, Indians had to be imported in large numbers. An army of 20,000 workers had to be fed, provided with water in an almost waterless country, and protected by stockades against man-eating lions which committed severe depredations among the working parties. The presence of the dreaded tsetse fly, fatal to cattle and beasts of burden, necessitated the transport of material from railhead to advance parties on men's backs, a very laborious and tedious process. Add to this the prevalence of fevers, jiggers, ulcers, and sores resulting from contact with the poisonous thorn bush, through which the pioneers had to cut their way for miles at a stretch, and risings and rebellions among the natives. There is but one tunnel on the line at a point about 50 miles from the lake terminus, but there are many bridges, some half a mile long and over 100 feet high. Gradients are heavy, especially in the Rift Valley, where some very clever engineering has carried the rail down the precipitous escarpment. The chief stations are Mombasa, Kilindini, Voi, 100 miles from Mombasa, Makindo, 205, Nairobi, 345, and Nakuru, 450. Nairobi is the headquarters of the line, with workshops, engine sheds, and administrative offices. On December 19, 1901, the first locomotive reached the lake, which is now 2½ days' journey from the coast. Over the old caravan route the time was 70 days. The railway, which is of meter gauge, laid on iron and wooden sleepers, cost the government £5,206,000. In 1901, the rolling stock included 69 locomotives, 150 passenger cars, and 850 goods wagons. Now that the road is completed, a great opening up of trade may be expected. 2 steamers of 600 tons displacement are being conveyed in pieces to the lake, where they will be assembled and initiate a regular service. The Victoria Nyanza, with its 500-odd miles of coastline, taps a huge area, the trade of which will naturally gravitate to the Uganda Railway, and make it, as first in the field, the established trade route. It is therefore expected that after the year 1910, the railway will begin to give substantial returns in addition to paying its own way. Of its beneficial effect on the country there can be no possible doubt. Sir Harry Johnstone has instanced as a tangible proof of the pacific influence of the iron way the fact that the erstwhile cattle raiding, man hunting Masai has consented to lay aside his murderous assegai for the navvy's pick. The southern sections, Cape to Bulawayo, is extremely up to date. After what we have read of railway traveling in South Africa during the late war, we may be inclined to regard it as a thing to be avoided. In cattle trucks it is so, no doubt, but if you choose to lay down 15 guineas on the counter, you may travel from Cape Town to Bulawayo in a train that will compare favorably with anything to be found in England or on the continent. The train de luxe contains dining and sleeping cars, lounges, kitchens, pantries, lavatories, and bathrooms, in fact all the conveniences of modern life. Already an arrangement has been made with the Cape Government Railways, under which circular tourist tickets, available for 1 month, will be issued for all stations on the Cape and Rhodesian railways. When the tourist begins to be considered, a country is pretty well advanced. The sportsman, too, will be provided for. He will be able to hire saloon carriages by the month, and travel whithersoever he wishes on the South African railway systems, keeping the saloon on a siding to act as headquarters for a shooting trip. For the sightseer, the great magnet will be the Victoria Falls, eclipsing Niagara in their grandeur. The water power running to waste will be harnessed in part before many years are out, and then we may expect to see an industrial town rising on the banks of the Zambesi, in which will be treated the copper, lead, zinc, and iron known to exist in vast deposits in central Rhodesia. Victoria Falls will thus become one of the great stations on the Cape to Cairo line, and the center of a civilization eclipsing that which has left behind it many imposing ruins at Zimbabwe and elsewhere. Side by side with the railway, but not entirely on the same route, another gigantic enterprise is being steadily pushed forward, the transcontinental telegraph. Work of this kind is not heralded by such a flourish of trumpets as is blown over plate laying, but its difficulties are often comparable and in many cases even greater. Here again the genius of Cecil Rhodes has been the mainspring of action. He obtained the necessary permission from the German authorities to push the slim wire through their territory. The price was heavy: a separate line at his own cost between Rhodesia and British East Africa, to be owned and used exclusively by the German government. The Rhodes section of the telegraph extends from Bulawayo to Ujiji on Lake Tanganyika, the present terminus. The following particulars of this great scheme have been kindly supplied to the writer by Mr. J. F. Jones, Joint Manager and Secretary of the British South Africa Company. At the annual meeting of the shareholders of the British South Africa Company in November, 1892, Mr. Rhodes propounded his scheme for the construction of a telegraph line to Egypt, and asked for assistance to enable him to extend the company's existing line from its terminus at Salisbury to Zamba in Nyasaland, and thence via the lakes Nyasa and Tanganyika, the ultimate object being to connect with the terminus of the Egyptian government system of telegraphs, thus placing Cape Town in through communication with Cairo and thence to England. Steps were at once taken toward the accomplishment of this design, and the African Transcontinental Company Limited was incorporated on December 27, 1892. It was decided to build the Zamba Salisbury portion from both ends simultaneously, meeting at Tete in Portuguese territory. The Mashona rising of 1896 stopped the work on the Salisbury Tete section, and when the country was pacified, it was found that the line had been practically destroyed. Mr. Rhodes therefore decided to abandon the old route, and a much better and healthier one was discovered to Tete from Umtali on the Salisbury Beira line, passing over the high plateau of northeast Mashonaland. Whilst this line was being constructed, the line north of Tete was steadily progressing towards Abercorn at the southern end of Lake Tanganyika, which was reached at the end of 1899. It was found that the most practicable route thence to the head of the lakes was on the eastern shore in German East Africa, and an agreement, referred to above, was entered into between Mr. Rhodes and the German government, dated March 15, 1899, by which the African Transcontinental Telegraph Company was permitted to construct the line through German territory. Notwithstanding the difficult nature of the country to be traversed, the great scarcity of labor, and in many parts of water, the work was proceeded with as fast as possible, and during the month of September, 1900, the line from Abercorn to Katuta, at the south end of Lake Tanganyika, was constructed and opened, and in the same month the construction from Kituta into German territory was commenced, the first German telegraph office being opened at Kasanga, now called Bismarckburg, a distance of 22.5 miles from Katuta. The extension of the line has been continued to Ujiji, a distance of 300 miles from Bismarckburg. Beyond this point construction is for the moment suspended, awaiting developments in the Marconi system of wireless telegraphy, which it may be expedient to adopt for certain portions of the route between Ujiji and Entebbe, owing to the very great constructional difficulties presented by the nature of the country lying to the north and east of Ujiji. In July, 1898, the British South Africa Company took over the maintenance and working of the African Transcontinental Telegraph Line under an agreement with the company, and the whole line is now under the supervision of the Postmaster General of South Rhodesia. It is possible to send telegrams to any point within Rhodesia at the rate of 1 pence a word, to the Cape Colony, Natal, and Transvaal for 2 pence a word, to European countries at 2s. 8d. a word. At present, 4,000 out of the 5,600 miles between the Cape and Cairo have been covered by the wire. Of the difficulties encountered, Mr. E. S. Grogan says: "The work of construction," he is here speaking particularly of the west coast of Lake Nyassa, "has been attended with the greatest possible difficulties, from the precipitous and densely wooded nature of the country and the pestilential climate. These had, however, by superhuman efforts, been overcome in the stipulated time by the handful of men engaged on the work. A wide track, straight as an arrow, uphill, down dale, across abysmal chasms, and through swamps, had been cleared, and iron posts set in iron shoes supported the wire. No one at home can realize the stupendous difficulties that have been overcome; but I, from observation, know, and take off my hat in awed admiration of that gallant band, who, quietly, relentlessly, and without a murmur, have accomplished the seemingly impossible. It stands out in bold relief as a colossal monument of what the Anglo Saxon can do." The general routine of construction was to send ahead of the main body a small party of surveyors to decide the path of the wires. Behind them, at a distance of anything up to 200 miles, followed an army of natives, marshaled by English engineers, who cut a broad path through jungle and forest, in the center of which the posts are placed. Each pole is 20 feet long and in 2 sections, the top of wrought iron, 15 feet 4 inches, gradually tapering; the lower a cast iron driving base, 5 feet long, into which the top section fits. The poles are fixed in the ground by means of an iron plate and spike, and steadied by stay wires. It would of course be useless to employ wood or any material not impervious to the attacks of the white ant. The transport of the poles, which weigh 160 pounds each, was a most difficult matter. Along with wire and other material, they were shipped up the rivers in shallow draft boats to the farthest available point, and then carried by porters or beasts of burden to the scene of operations. In connection with the Tanganyika section, vessels were built in England and transferred to the lake in pieces, reassembled, and loaded with material to accompany the march of the pioneers on the neighboring shore. In spite of the breadth of the clearings, the rate of vegetable growth requires constant vigilance on the part of the line tenders to prevent short circuits. A regular system of patrolling has to be employed to combat the rank vegetation. In the section from Shiromo to Chikwawa, on the Shire River, through the tract of swampy ground known as the Elephant's Marsh, it is practically impossible to keep the grass in order, owing to the number of crocodiles with which the swamp is infested. The result is a great loss of current. Elephants cause considerable trouble by selecting the poles as their rubbing posts. When a 4-ton animal leans against a frail iron post, and begins to sway backwards and forwards, something is bound to go in spite of the wire stays. The line is now so well guarded, however, that any failure is quickly remedied. Curiously enough, very little annoyance has been given by the natives. At first, indeed, some of the tribes were inclined to pull down the wires, but a few powerful electric shocks inspired them with due respect for the iron thread, which has now become fetish, even in districts where wire is the chief form of currency and therefore an object of general desire. One of the most serious blows to the expedition was the appearance of smallpox, which rages with great severity among the blacks. Panic stricken, the porters threw down their loads by the wayside and made for the bush in hundreds. The rate of construction varied greatly according to the nature of the country. In some parts the line advanced 20 miles a week, but in others, especially along the shore of Lake Nyassa, where the engineers encountered a series of marshes and dense forests, progress was very slow. In the same region, owing to the mountainous character of the country, abnormally long lengths of wire have to be used to span the deep ravines. For the present, construction is at a standstill. Whether the wires will continue their northward march to meet the Egyptian line depends on the success of Mr. Marconi's system. The distance to be traversed is great, 1,600 miles, and to flash messages plant of great power will be required, the maintenance of which may prove somewhat troublesome in the heart of Africa. Were Mr. Rhodes alive he would doubtless urge an all metal connection for political reasons, just as he championed an unbroken railway track from Cairo to the Cape. The English are essentially a practical nation, and both these great schemes will certainly be completed in the most practical manner, leaving sentiment on one side. End of chapter 8.